Hello, MOC. My name is Caleb Phillips, and I'm a member of the MOC Communications Committee. And I'm excited to welcome Professor Janet Dukerich today for our next mock talk. Professor Dukerich is the Vice Provost for Advocacy and Dispute Resolution and the Hugh Roy Cullen Chair at the University of Texas at Austin. She's one of the field's leading scholars in organizational image and identification and the recipient of the 2021 MOC Distinguished Scholar Award. Professor Dukerich, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I've been looking forward to chatting with you for a while, and we can take the conversation wherever you'd like to go, but I do have a few questions I'd like to start with, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
All right, great. So a few years ago, yourself and Professor Dutton authored The Relational Foundation of Research, an underappreciated dimension of interesting research, where you shared your reflections on how the quality of relationships formed during the research process significantly influences the depth and the impact of the research.
Mhm.
I'm curious, now almost 20 years later, and with many changes in the field around virtuality and new methods, just to name a few, if you have any updates or new thoughts to that essay.
hmm Yeah, and that's a great question because I think we can look at the quality of the relationship that one has with their co-authors, if there are any, and that can make a difference in terms of drawing on each other's strengths, having a good sounding board, and then actually just caring about working as hard as you can to make the research projects as successful as it can be because you believe that what you're doing is important and you don't want to let down the other person by, oh yeah, I'll get to that revision, or oh yeah, and then oh, this got in the way and that got in the way, and because you realize that there's a dependency on each other. And that I think still remains today, and regardless of how you work, whether you're working in person or you're working over Zoom or you're virtual, whatever it may be. I think, and I spent a little time thinking about this because you can also look at the quality of the relationship that you have with the people or participants who are supplying the data. And all, not all, but almost all of my projects, I have worked with human subjects. Either running them in a lab experiment or, within surveys or qualitative research. And, and to the extent that you're thinking about what they are supplying to you, that's critical, and how you are learning from them. That to me also enriches the whole process. Like, you really, I mean, I started out in cognitive social psychology. So it was, the idea was, how to extract what was in someone's head in terms of what they were thinking about, how they were making decisions, what information were they paying attention to, and and kind of and enjoying the whole process of learning how, what's in there, that I'd like to know. And then in terms of qualitative research where you're doing interviews, I mean, you'll have an idea as because you have typically a set of questions that you're going to ask, and you're trying to figure out certain themes in terms of the research. But in almost all the interviews I've ever done, there's an element of surprise. It's like, wow, I never thought of that, or you've taken this question off in an area that I hadn't ever envisioned. And that's to me exciting. Um, I think you have less of that intimate relationship with survey research because you're asking people again. You're dealing with people, but it's not that kind of one-on-one experience. And then if you're using archival data, now you're even more divorced from it. So I think you have to kind of be clever in terms of thinking about how that, because someone's supplying data somehow in one way or the other. So it's a matter of, I think, having the respect for those who are supplying that data, and viewing it almost as a treasure. And you're mining what that treasure is, but I think you have to be respectful of the data itself and whomever is supplying it.
Yeah, I really like that. The reciprocal nature of the research, of the informant informing the research process itself. I might kind of stick on that kind of
Yeah.
qualitative mixed methods approach,
Hmm.
because I feel like I'm noticing more journals increasingly embracing
Yeah.
qualitative and mixed methods, and having participants and informants really inform the research process,
Yeah.
um, as well as kind of the reciprocal nature even within quantitative, as you said. Um,
Sure.
what excites you most about these current trends and methods, and what advice do you have for early career researchers in embracing new methods?
Yeah. So I think, uh, obviously that lengthens the time for research when you are using multi-methods. I think it's the strong point is it really helps you triangulate. When let's say you started out with archival data and then you maybe do some interviews or surveys with people who are in the field. I think you get a better sense of the context from which that archival data came from, and understanding more of the nuances of the phenomena that you are studying. And that to me is very exciting. I think it's easy to go into research unless it's completely inductive, with a kind of an idea of what you're looking for and what you ought to be finding. And sometimes that can almost get too rote, where, it's like, I'm going to go back to a very, very old article on that's surprising. When research is surprising, it's like, wow, that's not what I would have expected in this situation. Those are the research papers that I think have had the most impact on any field. And I think you're more likely to find that surprising aspect of research when you are using multi-methods. And it doesn't matter whether, even if you say, well, I'm just a qualitative researcher, again, I think you can get into that trap of, looking in a more predictable way, as opposed to when you're using multiple methods. I think you increase the probability that you're going to say, wow, just didn't see that coming. And if you're surprised, it's likely that the recipients of your research project, whether it's co-authors or whether it's just people who are reading it, will be surprised as well, and it will spark some, like a new idea, etc. Now, offset off that is, um, it takes much longer. And it's also, especially for early careers, I don't think you want to go in thinking that you're going to be an expert at everything. So that's where, you may want to look for other people to work on a project who have very different skills than your own, so that, you can learn from them, but that you're not the expert in all things. So, let's say that you're really good at creating survey instrumentation, crafting, questions, working with someone who is really good at extracting archival data, might be helpful, and you'll learn along the way how that process occurs, or qualitative, whatever it may be.
Yes, yes. And I think you spoke to that in your relational foundations when you came in primarily as a lab experimentalist and worked with Professor Dutton and had questions on protocols and um,
Yeah,
kind of informing each other. Yeah.
it was a big struggle for me because, and that's why, when we were chatting earlier, how I started out was so different from how I ended up, because I started out pretty dogmatic. I only believed that phenomena existed at the individual level of analysis. I mean, and anything beyond that, I just thought, oh, that's you're just making this all up. And I was really focused because I was trained as an experimentalist. I was really focused on control, and so working with Jane, in a very different methodology in which we were looking at phenomena that wasn't at the individual level of analysis, really was eye-opening for me. And um, I almost was chagrined at how I was so dismissive of research, especially I was very dismissive of macro research, like, what is this, stuff going on at the organizational or societal or whatever level. That just didn't fit in my world frame. And then I realized that that dismissiveness was really, a detraction to me, not to them. So I think, as a doctoral student, if you can, again, you're not going to be an expert at everything all at once. So there's nothing wrong with saying I'm going to focus mostly in terms of archival or qualitative or experimental, whatever it may be. But recognizing that there are lots of different ways to extract data, to try to figure out what's going on, and to be open to very different ideas. So I'm going to digress. I remember that one of the early academy meetings. This is when MOC was just started as an interest group, and I talked to some scholars in Europe who had a very different idea and perspective on cognition than I did. And at first it was like, well, that's not cognition. And then I recognized that, I finally realized, it took me a while, that, it's just a different perspective, and it's a more enriching way to look at the phenomena. Or, people have very different ideas about how to think about identity. And, if you're dismissive of other ways, I don't think you will grow as a scholar.
That's great. That's great. I like this idea of being open to new ideas and also new methods. And it reminds me also of your relational foundations, of you talked of being vulnerable and the importance of being genuinely interested and feedback seeking and trustworthy. And I feel we as researchers don't talk so much about these soft skills of research. And I'm
Mhm.
curious of your thoughts and if you have any personal stories of when you saw these soft skills really impact the quality of the research.
Uh, the if I go back to the Port Authority paper, that was probably where it hit me the most. Again, I had a very close relationship with Jane that developed through that project. I was genuine. I think I had gone into the project thinking, oh, because we initially said we're going to look at how people talk about hot emotional issues versus more cold pragmatic business issues. And we started with the hot emotional issue, which is homelessness, and how the Port Authority had to deal with this. And um, I remember just, when going into the Port Authority offices and looking around and seeing what people are doing, it's like, wow, it's different than when you're running subjects in undergraduate or MBA subjects in a lab, experimental setting. And I just remember thinking, these are real people who with a real job, who have real, fears and joys with what they do. And it just was very infectious. And so it was that was a different experience for me, working with someone who was trained a bit differently and more, had a more macro perspective. That was different for me. We also had a personal relationship. And, it was a fulsome project. And when I reflect back on projects or papers that are memorable to me, it would be those that kind of fall into that realm of where you genuinely care about, who you're working with, whether it's the subjects, the participants, your co-authors. You care about what the question is, as opposed to the answer. And because I have papers in which, yeah, we kind of just went, yeah, we're gonna, get these data, analyze them, we'll write it. And then, those are the papers that frankly, I almost forget about. Like, yeah, I guess I did that. I was cleaning out my office and I found some papers like, oh yeah, I barely remember them. And the ones that though I still remember, they could be as old or older, but it's ones in which, it was the fulsomeness of that process.
I like that. I like that a lot. It's making me reflect on my own research projects and the ones that kind of fill me with meaning. And it's the ones where I get to work with colleagues and faculty who care about me as much as they care about the research. And
Exactly,
it's
exactly. Yeah,
really fulfilling.
yeah.
That kind of leads me into my next question because it actually comes from one of my current faculty who I get to work with, Dr. Naranjan Janardhanan, who is one of your previous students.
Hmm.
And he mentioned how you have seen a few generations of scholars. You've seen your advisors, your peers, your students, and your students' students. And he wonders how you've seen what's required of a PhD student change over the years.
Uh, yeah, I don't know if it's really changed all that much, other than, um, going back to the earlier discussion we have about multi-methods, is that I think research projects tend to take even longer than they did before, which puts a lot of pressure on. But, the the students that I was, when I was a doctoral student, the students where I started to work with others, as training as a faculty member, the ones who are successful get involved in research right away. And, the program that I was involved in, you started out as an RA, from the very beginning. I actually started running experiments because I was a work study student, and at Ohio State. As a freshman, I started running subjects. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this was so much fun. And then when I started the doctoral program, it's like, well, you've been running subjects, what have you seen? What would you like to do? And so I then started suggesting, studies to do on my own. So I think that the earlier you can get involved in the research process, it will, it aids your training from obviously the coursework that you're doing, but also it will then expose you, hopefully, if you're working with different people, to different methods, different perspectives, different theoretical approaches. Uh, and and hopefully it will help you decide, is this the path I really want? Because I do find that, and it's there's nothing, that's the ultimate question in terms of, in order to be successful, you again, going back to this theme of, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. Is it's the life of an academic is wonderful. Like, I couldn't imagine a better career at all, but it's not an easy path. So if you're just kind of going through the motions, those are the ones who realize, yeah, yeah, this is not my cup of tea. And if you can discover that earlier versus later, that's better. So I think as a doctoral student, I would encourage them to dive right in. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, just dive right in. And after so a couple of years at least, I think you have to do some soul searching to say, is being a faculty member at an R1 institution, is this really what I want? Because it's not going to get easier after you graduate. It's going to get harder. So is this something that is sustaining to you? Or would you rather go to a place in which there's not as much emphasis, there's more emphasis on teaching or advising, or you realize, you know what, I just don't like this at all. I don't want to be an academic, which is fine. It's just, and I think when you get involved right away, you have a better idea as to, is this something that I wake up in the morning, I go, oh my gosh. I remember, Jane Dutton, Jane had such a huge impact on me. I think it was a day in which, I was just, oh my gosh, there's just so much to do. And she said, you know what? Can you believe they pay us to do this? Because this is the best thing in the world. And I would do this for free, but they pay us. And I realized, you know what? That's true. And when you have that joy in what you're doing, that's when you say, you know what? Yeah, it's great that I'm making money, but I would do this anyway because I'm having so much fun.
I love that. I love that. That's great. Good to keep in mind, especially mid PhD, and
Yeah.
I'm preparing to defend my PhD proposal. So the
Well,
stress,
congratulations.
oh,
Yeah.
thank you. But it's good to keep in mind of how lucky are we. So
Yes,
yes.
yes, absolutely. I talk to too many people who, you know, they focus on how many years do I have until I retire.
Mm.
Uh, and I've always thought, well, I mean, I'll retire eventually. I mean, that is going to happen. But, it wasn't anything that's like, oh gosh, I can't wait. I'm counting the days, the hours until that happens. Like, I love what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I love that. Awesome. Well, I just have one more question to kind of close this out. As a current PhD student in what seems like a rapidly evolving field of management research that is increasingly impacted by more macroeconomic factors and forces, what advice do you have for me and my fellow students for not only persevering through seemingly chaotic times, but continuing to drive and generate impactful research?
mhm. Uh, you know, I'm going to go back because that's the thematic aspect of all the questions that I have is um, focus more on what you are genuinely interested and passionate about. It's the questions you're trying to find answers to. It's the people with whom you're working, and that will be more sustaining. Because the fields, it has ebbed and flowed. It evolves. It's you know in some ways, there's more of a wealth of data now, which is than there ever was before, which is exciting. It's increasingly easier to work with people in very different places with very different perspectives than it had been before. So those are all kind of exciting things. But you don't want to let that overwhelm you because again, you just have to focus on what's the stuff that you just say, I want to wake up today. When I wake up in the morning, this is something that I really am interested in pursuing, as opposed to, oh, it's just, I gotta spend X number of hours analyzing data or X number of hours writing or X number of whatever it may be. But it's like, wow, I'm going to work on this today, and that's really kind of fun.
That's
It should
great.
be fun.
It should. And it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Professor Dukerich. This was wonderful, and I'm so excited that we get to share your insights with so many MOC members. So thank you again for joining.
Sure. Well, and thank you so much for asking me. It's been a wonderful experience. So.